Officer Rick Thompson leaned back in his patrol car, his eyes scanning the quiet stretch of road. It had been an uneventful shift, and boredom was starting to creep in. That's when he spotted a sleek silver sedan, cruising a little faster than the rest. The driver, a sharply dressed black man, exuded confidence, which Rick found irritating. He smirked. It was the perfect excuse to break the monotony. "Let's see what we've got here," Rick muttered as he flipped on the flashing lights and pulled onto the road. The sedan slowed to a stop almost immediately. The driver didn't seem rattled, and that annoyed Rick even more. He strode up to the window, tapping it with unnecessary force. "License and registration," Rick demanded, his tone sharp. The man inside complied without hesitation, handing over his documents in silence. "Is there an issue, officer?" the man asked in an even tone. "You were speeding," Rick replied curtly, though he knew it wasn't true. The driver's calm demeanor didn't waver. "I was driving 35 in a 40 zone. Care to explain how that's speeding?" That calm confidence lit a fire in Rick's gut. He didn't like being questioned, especially by someone who didn't show the slightest hint of fear. "Step out of the car," Rick barked. "For what reason?" "Don't make me repeat myself," Rick shot back, his hand hovering near his cuffs. The man let out a resigned sigh and exited the car. "Hands on the hood," Rick ordered, grabbing his cuffs. "You're making a mistake," the driver said coolly, his voice steady but firm. Rick sneered. "I'll be the judge of that." With a quick motion, he twisted the man's arms and secured the cuffs. "You're under arrest for resisting," Rick added, even though there had been no resistance to speak of. The man remained calm, his expression unreadable. There was no panic, no anger, just a quiet, knowing gaze that made Rick feel an uncomfortable twist in his chest. "You'll regret this, officer," the man said evenly as Rick led him to the patrol car. Rick laughed, dismissing the comment. He had no idea how true those words would turn out to be. Back at the station, Rick guided the man down the corridor, savoring the usual mix of power and satisfaction that came with processing a new detainee. "Sit tight," Rick said mockingly, shoving the man into an interrogation room and locking the door behind him. The man sat with perfect composure, his hands folded on the metal table. Unlike others who squirmed or shouted, he appeared unshaken. If anything, he seemed to be quietly observing his surroundings, calculating something. Rick slouched in his chair as he started filling out the arrest report. "Name?" he asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Marcus Hall," the man replied, his tone calm as ever. The name rang a faint bell, but Rick brushed it off, too focused on his own sense of authority to care. "You think you're some kind of big deal, don't you?" Rick muttered, glancing at the man's tailored suit. "Guess what? That doesn't mean anything in here." Marcus offered a faint smile, but said nothing. The silence made Rick uncomfortable. Most people either yelled or begged for a phone call by this point, but Marcus's stillness unnerved him. Rick stood and headed to the duty desk, where Officer Bradley was entering the detainee's information into the system. "Hey, Bradley, get this guy's details logged so I can wrap this up," Rick said casually. Bradley paused, his fingers frozen above the keyboard. His face paled as he glanced at the screen. "Rick," Bradley whispered, his voice laced with disbelief. "Do you have any idea who you just brought in?" Rick frowned. "What are you talking about?" "That's Marcus Hall, the state attorney general." The words hit Rick like a punch to the gut. He stared at Bradley, his mind racing. "You're kidding," he stammered, though the sinking feeling in his stomach told him it was no joke. Officer Bradley turned the computer monitor toward Rick Thompson, revealing a photo of Marcus Hall alongside the title State Attorney General. Rick's heart sank, and a chill ran down his spine. "Do you know what you've done?" Bradley snapped. "This man oversees every officer in the state. He exposes corruption for a living, and you arrested him. On a fake charge." Rick stammered. "Maybe he won't press it." "Look outside," Bradley shot back. Rick turned to see reporters crowding the precinct entrance, cameras flashing. The interrogation room door opened, and Marcus stepped out, flanked by the chief and a lieutenant. "Officer Thompson," Marcus said calmly, placing a business card on the desk. "You'll need this for your defense. And yes, I'll be at your hearing." Rick froze as Marcus walked out, the media frenzy exploding outside. His career was in free fall. The courtroom buzzed with tension as reporters filled the gallery. Rick sat at the defense table, pale and uneasy. The doors opened, and Marcus Hall entered, his composed demeanor silencing the room. "All rise," the judge announced. "We are here for the case of the unlawful arrest of Marcus Hall by Officer Richard Thompson." Marcus stood, addressing the judge. "Your Honor, let this trial be fully transparent." The judge nodded, and the first evidence, a body cam recording, played. The footage showed Rick unjustifiably arresting Marcus. Gasps rippled through the room. "Officer Thompson," Marcus asked, "do you see any resistance in this footage?" Rick mumbled, "No, not exactly." "You fabricated the charges," Marcus pressed. "I was just doing my job," Rick blurted, drawing a sharp bang of the judge's gavel. Marcus concluded, "This case highlights a culture of unchecked misconduct. Today's decision represents more than just one officer. It's a step toward accountability." The judge ruled, "Officer Thompson, you are suspended, and a criminal investigation into abuse of power is now open." Rick slumped in defeat as Marcus exited, ignoring the media frenzy awaiting him outside. For Rick, the fallout had just begun. The fallout from Officer Rick Thompson's reckless decision reverberated far beyond the courtroom. News outlets across the country latched onto the story, framing it as a pivotal moment in the battle against systemic abuse of power. The footage of Marcus Hall's calm composure contrasted starkly with Rick's aggressive behavior, making it impossible for the public to look away. As the investigation into Rick's actions deepened, more details emerged about his history of questionable arrests and misconduct. Former complaints, long buried under bureaucracy, resurfaced, painting a damning portrait of a man who had operated without accountability for years. Rick found himself not just the subject of scrutiny, but a symbol of a broken system. Meanwhile, Marcus Hall's deliberate handling of the situation turned him into a national figure. His measured statements to the press struck a chord with a weary public. "This isn't about revenge," he said during one interview. "It's about reform. We cannot allow unchecked power to undermine justice." The scandal ignited public demands for change. Protests erupted in cities nationwide, calling for police reform and stricter oversight. Lawmakers, feeling the mounting pressure, began drafting bills aimed at curbing abuses of authority and increasing transparency within law enforcement. For Rick, the weight of his choices became unbearable. Once a confident officer who thrived on power, he now faced a cascade of legal battles, public outrage, and the loss of his badge. His name became a cautionary tale, a reminder that the unchecked abuse of authority could no longer be swept under the rug. As for Marcus Hall, the courtroom victory was just the beginning. He used the momentum to push for lasting reforms, turning his personal ordeal into a rallying cry for justice and accountability. The system had faltered, but this time, it wouldn't be allowed to break. As Marcus Hall walked away from the courthouse, he addressed the crowd with a simple yet powerful message: justice is a journey, not a destination. His words inspired hope, marking the beginning of a movement that would challenge the status quo. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the streets, a symbol of collective determination to demand lasting change.